Just for me. What a gal. Good. How are you?
Welcome writers, and welcome parents of writers, and spouses and relatives and friends and loved ones of writers. Here's how Thomas Mann defined writers. Writers are people for whom writing is more difficult than it is for other people. And at least in my case, unfortunately, that is very true. We honor those tonight who have met this difficult challenge, have prevailed, and are now going out in a blaze of glory. It is my privilege to be associated with these talented writers who happen to be, as writers frequently are, also wonderful and warm people. I hate to see them go, so I will just tell you up front that we are not letting you go. And I want you to think of your time as MFA students as an interesting and important phase in your membership, lifetime membership of our community of writers. And seeing that, actually, of all the things I wasn't expecting, but I feel it's exciting but sad. I mean, I see the extraordinary people here and the talent that we have in the program is amazing, and we'll get a glimpse of it this evening. We have a wonderful program planned, so let's begin. Neil Gabler is the ideal faculty member for us. He is a prodigiously productive and accomplished writer and a dazzling teacher. He is the author of many notable books, including biographies of Walter Winchell and Walt Disney, and he is presently writing biography of Ted Kennedy, an enormous undertaking. And in his spare time, your spare time, in his role as distinguished cultural and political commentator, he has produced, just in the last couple of months, and I'm serious, literally scores of essays and reviews. And for me, someone who in the equivalent time has produced literally scores of words. Well, I am in awe of him, and I am absolutely staggered by the intensity and the commitment that he brings to writing. He has received many honors, a few recent ones, a recent semester as a Shorenstein Fellow at Harvard. I don't know if it's been publicly announced, but he just won the Patrick Henry Writing Fellowship, which requires a residency at Washington College. And there's a significant stipend I earned today. With these various residencies, I would like to point out to him that you may enjoy these visits to other institutions, but as with our new graduates, you may not leave us. And when it says visiting professor, that's just a category we have. That is not to be taken seriously. I am proud to have him as a colleague and a friend. Please welcome Neil Gabler.
We'll see if he still wants me back after I make these remarks. That's the real test. You know, I've, like all of you, have attended many ceremonies like this one and listened to many blowhards give their bromides as they send students off into the world. Did you know that commencement means beginning? But you never heard that one. And so I was so gratified when Julie Sheehan asked me to speak here, because I thought, now I am one of those blowhards. Now my resume is complete. So, as a blowhard, well, here's the consolation of being a blowhard, I might add. Everything I say is instantly forgettable. So, at least I have that consolation. So, as a blowhard, I want to say to you, first of all, I want to extend my congratulations, because we all feel this tremendous sense of warmth and pride in you. Congratulations as you embark on this career. And now let me also extend my condolences as you embark on this career. Because this is a career, as one who's been doing it for many, many years, without benefits, without a pension, without security, and full of humiliation. I mean, how many people expose themselves and their work to the world to be criticized, almost always negatively? I once described the completion of a book as 2 weeks of exhilaration, followed by 2 years of humiliation. And you have all of this to look forward to, because that's the good stuff. I haven't talked about the negative stuff yet. But we all know, I think we all know, and I tell this to my students, one of the very first things I say in my class is, writing is not a profession. If you think of it as a profession, you should head for the door. Exit immediately. Because there are so many other things you can do with your life that are more financially rewarding, certainly, than writing, and that will give you more security and all the other things that come with a real profession. Writing is an addiction, not a profession. And if you don't have the addiction, get out of here. But if you have it, there's really nothing you can do about it except to try to deal with it in productive ways. You know, when you have an addiction, it's like any other addiction. I mean, you can do what other addicts do, which is wind up being a multi-million-dollar rock star. But if you don't have that option, then you just have to deal with it in productive ways. And though it's an addiction, and though it is something which you have to kind of tolerate on a daily basis, it is also, as we all know, a privilege. That's the really good part of this. Of course, it's a little like the privilege that God gave to Jesus. You have the privilege to save the world, but you have to suffer the most tremendous agony for it. Because let's face it, I mean, what does a writer do? A writer's job is really to save the world. I didn't use that analogy completely out of the blue. It's to save the world by looking at the world in interesting ways that will help people deal with their lives. That's really what you're charged with. Whether you're writing fiction, non-fiction, poetry, whatever it is, you are charged with looking at the world in interesting ways that will help you and other people deal with the world. I say that's a privilege, but it's a privilege that comes with, you know, a great deal of agony. A great deal of agony. To see the world differently. I love the story that Picasso once told. When he said, I failed math because every time I saw a 7, I thought it was an upside-down nose. Looking at the world in different ways. And I love a story, and I tell this story to my students. I love the story of Stanley Kaufman, the film critic. And he was teaching a history of film course. And as an essay question, he charged his students with saying, tell me what you know about Charlie Chaplin. And one of the responses he got was, well, Professor Kaufman, I can't really tell you how much I know about Charlie Chaplin, but I can tell you what Charlie Chaplin knows about me. And in many respects, that is indeed kind of the definition of an artist. Not what you know about the artist, but what the artist knows about you. What the artist understands about your emotional system, about your values, about you. That's what you bring to this. That is your privilege. And it's a privilege that comes, as Padachevsky, the great playwright and screenwriter, once said. He said, to be sensitive is to be in pain every day. So welcome to the world of art and writing. To be in pain every day. You're looking forward to this now, right? Now, I have to say that when I was your age, and once upon a time I was your age, believe it or not, very, very long time ago, I did everything I possibly could, with great desperation, to reject both the agony and the privilege. I went to law school. I went to graduate school. I went to, some of you know, went to television. I did not want to embrace this, and by the way, neither did my parents. So I think that all of you up here owe a gigantic debt of gratitude to parents who didn't say to you, go to law school, or go to medical school, or go to business school, but for God's sake, don't become a writer. I did everything I possibly could to keep it at bay, until I finally embraced it. And when I embraced it, I got to feel that privilege that I mentioned, that exhilaration that I mentioned. And it does, yes, maybe it only lasts for 2 weeks when you finish a book, but there are all those kind of periods, interstitial periods, where you feel this tremendous sense of joy at what you accomplished. And next to holding a child in your arms, to be honest, and now I'm going to sound like a writer, there was probably nothing more thrilling than holding one of your books in your hand. It is just something that is one of those great moments of your life. Something else to which you've given birth, and something that's tremendously exciting. But with that privilege and with that pain also comes a tremendous responsibility. And that is the responsibility not to do crap. You know, this is a society full of crap. A society for a lot of people full of crap, but it's a society that is generally full of crap. And, you know, the crap is everywhere. In the writing world, not only is there tons and tons of crap, but you get rewarded for doing crap. And I don't believe that anyone ever died wanting on his or her tombstone the epitaph, I did crap. So your responsibility, among other things, is not to do crap, but to do things that, at least within the bounds of your talents and your standards, are excellent. Now, in my desperation to get away from writing, I found myself flung into movies and writing about movies when I was a film critic. And one of my favorite lines in any film is a line from the Sam Peckinpah movie, Ride to High Country, a Western, with Joel McRae and Randolph Scott, when they were aging at this point, and they played two old cowboys who were nearing the end of their lives and trying to come to terms with it. And there's a tremendous line in that film where Joel McRae says, I just want to enter my house justified. And I think there is probably no more powerful kind of guide. Shows how much I love movies. But I still believe there's no more powerful guide than that line of I just want to enter my house justified. Because success can justify a career. And I only hope that you're all tremendously successful. But excellence justifies life. And that's what I hope you will have. So, I hope that you all enter your houses justified. And just so I kind of save myself from being a total bloviator, I have one last trick, and we'll see whether it works. Stare into this.
Hello, I'm Julie Sheehan. I'm the program director at the moment, but I'm about to take off my ordinary mortal jacket. And put on an extraordinary immortal jacket belonging to Frank McCourt, who's our patron saint and presiding spirit. He would probably find that saint thing a little icky. Sorry about that, Frank. So bestowed with the powers invested in this jacket, I am going to introduce to you the candidates tonight for a Master of Fine Arts. Now, each of them will read a little bit from their thesis project, so you'll hear a taste from each one of them, and then later you can rush out and buy the book and hold it in your hands, right? There'll be a chance after each candidate comes up and does their reading, there'll be a little photo opportunity with Frank McCourt's jacket and your beloved. I highly recommend for the scrapbooks. Okay, and so without further ado, I'm going to step over in my area. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, get started with Genevieve Crane. Her thesis, Luck and Other Disasters, is a short fiction collection centered around loss of control.
This is an excerpt from a story titled Sisterhood. Emergency exit only. Alarm will sound. This is the chapter room. The sign is a ruse for visiting parents and curious frat brothers. Only initiated sisters are permitted in the chapter room, and even they can't enter without the password and the handshake and appropriate attire. This means pantyhose. No open-toed shoes after October 7th. Shoulders covered. Mascara mandatory. The dress code in the Sisterhood manual is longer than the 2-paragraph page on how to report hazing. Notice the executive board table, the chairs arranged in a horseshoe, the wood-paneled walls, the composites of sisters from years past, 60s bobs, 70s waves, 80s bangs, then firms of the 90s. Candles everywhere, Persian rugs, fake flowers. This is where we all met after Margot was found last spring. The girls who knew her least wept pretty tears, dabbing under their eyes so their makeup wouldn't run. Nobody loves an ugly crier. And Deirdre sat in the back row, expressionless, her fingers numb, staring hard at a hole in her tights. Alina lifted the gavel and let it fall on the table, and we all quieted, waiting for some heartfelt delivery of insight from our president. I spoke with the provost, and for now the university will not shut the house down because of Margot's poor decision, she said. Thank God, Janelle said. Heads around the room bobbed in the current of relief. Tracy yanked out 4 eyebrow hairs in one grab, then discreetly dropped them on the carpet underneath her chair. This is an opportunity for unity, Alina intoned. She had written this part of her speech on an index card and glanced at the table before her between pauses. Although one of us is now enrolled in the Omega chapter, let us take solace in our sisterhood. Let us seek comfort in our family. Let us mourn with dignity and grace. Does this mean that Spring Fling is canceled? Stella asked. No, Alina said. momentarily thrown from the formal voice she'd conjured for the occasion. "We can't get our deposit back. And anyway," she resumed the voice again, "Margot would have wanted us to continue with our sisterhood in her absence." Sighs of relief gusted through the room. Deirdre's fingers tingled. "Let us close with a prayer," Alina said. Our eyes shimmered wet in the candlelight, seeking comfort from her in a bona fide tragedy, and Alina's face lit with a flash of pride before she sombered. When the prayer ended, we filed out of the room in pairs, but even in the hush, Deirdre caught frayed edges of whispers.
Now, this is for you. Genevieve's thesis advisor is Ursula Heggie. Stand up. Presenting her with a book of her advisor's choosing. We'll do that for each of the candidates. Ursula Heggie chose for Genevieve Crane, The Tiger's Wife, a first novel by a young writer, Taya Obra, who reminds me of you in her depth of vision, her poetic language, and her courage to take risks. Keep writing. Hanrahan. His thesis, I'm From Here, is a novel set in a small Irish town with three main characters, two of whom left and came home, and one who tried to leave and failed.
I was going to call this piece charming, and then I remembered that most Irishmen hate the word. Sean knew he couldn't put it off for another day. He would simply have to talk to John's wife, Grania. He had to find out what went wrong. Try as he might, he couldn't get a word out of young John. From the day he arrived back looking for a place to stay, he would talk about anything except Grania. Sean tried every which way to provoke him, but he never rose to the bait. It was time to make the call. He'd have to be calm. He'd make himself a cup of tea. That would help. Grania answered the phone on the second ring. "Who's this?" "Grania, it's Sean Fitzgerald, John's father." "Yes, sir, I know who you are. Can I help you?" "I was hoping we could chat." Silence. Sean plugged in the electric kettle. "Chat," she said. "Chat? After all this time you want to chat with me? Jesus, you have some nerve. Grania, I know we've had our differences. Is that what you call them? I suppose you're calling to ask me to take your lousy son back. Well, not a chance. You're stuck with him now. Grania, that's not why I called, and there's no need to be difficult and insulting. You think I'm insulting? I'll tell you what's insulting. That shit of a son of yours is insulting. He pissed off and left me high and dry after getting a golden handshake. That's insulting, if you must know. Thank God there are no kids involved. I suppose I should thank him for that, not that he was that interested." Sean didn't know what to say. The kettle began to whistle. "I was hoping," he trailed off. "No, Mr. Fitz, never mind what you were hoping. Let me tell you what I was hoping. That he'd end up in a ditch somewhere and we'd all be rid of him. That's what I was hoping. I was going to say, I wonder if you and I could meet. I didn't see you at his mother's funeral and wonder if he had told you she had died. Oh, he told me all right, the night before the funeral. Probably thinking I wouldn't show, but I did. I stayed at the back. I didn't want to embarrass anyone. No one noticed me and I was fine with that. No, I'm not at all sure meeting you would be such a good idea, sir. I wouldn't feel comfortable coming all the way into town to be given the once-over by the locals. I was glad to get away from small-town life and move to a place like Limerick. No one stares at you here and you can do what you like. I'm sorry you feel that way, Grania. I think John is very unhappy and I was hoping to get to the bottom of it. He was standing with the kettle in his hand and put some boiling water in the teapot to heat it up. Well, he was really unhappy when he met me, sir, I can tell you that. I thought I would cheer him up, but he wasn't having any of it. When he took the golden handshake, he said he was going to use it to get as far away from here as possible. How far did he go? 25 bloody miles, that's how far. What does that tell you about him, Mr. Fitz? Sean emptied the water into the sink, put 2 tea bags in the pot and filled it. I'll tell you what, Mr. Fitzgerald, I'm not very interested in opening old sores. I'm trying to live my life as best I can and would prefer not to get involved in your family matters. I was never included or made welcome by the Fitzgeralds. I don't want you to call me here ever again. And you and your son should get on with your lives. Good night. There was no click, but Sean knew the line was dead. He poured the tea, rooted in the cupboard for a biscuit, and went in to watch the 9 o'clock news. Charming, he thought. What a cheeky little bitch. John is well rid of her.
Patrick's thesis advisor is Luann Walker. Stand up. And she chose James Thurber, Writings and Drawings, because of the work's pencil-line depictions of people, of place, of emotion, of diffidence, and of course because an Irishman's knowledge of the world is so all-encompassing. And even more seriously, because Hanrahan understands life's jokes and life's dictates, life's scoldings and life's exultations. Emily Logan. Her thesis, The Copy, is a novel in which Andrew Kraft leaves behind a perfect copy of himself after he dies, and his wife, Stephanie, believes it is a cruel joke.
They'd been tracking his case for a little over a year, waiting to see if his worsening condition would offer them a new project. His death meant their dollar, and as it turned out, his cancer was, in fact, back, for good. So 3 scientists, 2 engineers, and 1 psychologist entered his hospital room that day, instead of the 1 doctor that Andrew had expected. They delivered his bad news like a game announcer reveals a score. We win, you lose. But in a very different twist, the announcers also revealed a way in which to fix the next game. We can make you live forever, they said, but you have to die first. Andrew had gotten up to leave thinking it was a joke, or maybe he was in the wrong room. When he lifted himself to go, the psychologist wrote down something on her pad. They urged him to sit back down. They told him they'd been tracking him for quite some time, that they knew of his marriage with Stephanie Phoenix, how it must not have been what he had wanted or planned. He had asked how they could possibly know. Where is she now, Mr. Kraft? On such a day, one of the researchers said. Andrew had no answer. Stephanie could have taken Beck with her, or dropped her off at a friend's house. Any other wife would have been there today. The pain of knowing he was going to die was one thing, but suddenly the past 8 years seemed a waste. All the fighting, the mind games, the nights facing opposite sides of the wall. They loved each other completely in the beginning, but how it turned out, even with Beck in their lives. Mr. Kraft, one scientist said, surprising Andrew back to life. Have you heard of No Goodbyes? Andrew had. 35 years ago, No Goodbyes was a small prosthetic body part manufacturer. Designed such lifelike prosthetics that recipients of the parts swore they weren't missing the real thing. Amputees, accident survivors, people born without pieces, paid hundreds of thousands to feel whole. It wasn't long before the company combined with computer scientists and robotic engineers to create parts of the body that required more extensive work. Andrew had read on the news one day that they were developing thinking synthetic brains. For 10 years now, No Goodbyes has given people the option to work with scientists to create a copy of themselves to leave to their loved ones after they die. Only the wealthy could afford it, and while it was becoming more of a common practice, it wasn't often advertised, as copies were meant to be exact replicas, body and mind, which meant the copies were unaware that there were wires and circuits underneath their perfectly human casing. Extensive advertisement might cause unnecessary copy conflict. The potential for malfunction was very real. Sending teams out for recruits was quieter, less controversial, which is why 6 team members surrounded Andrew now, laying out their pitch. Every mannerism, every memory, every quirk and flaw would be reflected in his copy. It would be an exact replica, with the ability to respond, act, and grow, just as Andrew would have had he had lived. Grow. Perhaps it was the one word he needed to hear in order to be convinced. He wanted growth, not the tall and wide kind of growth. He wanted the growth that he promised Stephanie from the beginnings. The love they promised would increase day by day. He wanted to take 8 years back and start completely over, like hitting restart on a button on a computer. Andrew had the money, and now he had the reason. He would do it. Okay, he told the team. Okay.
Emily's thesis advisor is John Westerman, who couldn't be here tonight. And he chose the collected stories of John Cheever because in her thesis, Emily examined the tangled web of domestic relations and the corrosive effects of secrets and the passage of time on these bonds. Like Cheever, she made the familiar tragic and compelling. Tracy M. King-Sanchez. Her thesis, The Sum of My Parts, is a collection of essays about growing up a foster child and the mistakes and lessons learned along the bumpy road to womanhood.
Did you know that every woman who's ever had an abortion is anti-life? That abortions are habit-forming, and the younger you are, the more easily addicted you become? Abortions are to young girls what air is to every human being. Those who lambaste these teenage life suckers are 100% right when they state, if they didn't want to get pregnant, they should have simply kept their legs closed. After all, it is their choice. They are born into a world where every single one of them is given endless opportunities, just as long as they don't lift up their skirt. In fact, they don't have to wear skirts, as pants and his trusty zipper keep it all under lock. These modern day charlatans, hoes in the making, take to abortions like rats take to cheese. It's like a new status symbol, a competition of sorts among their growing kind. These serpent girls whose only desires is to have swollen bellies because it's the new black, certain to be a hit during Fashion Week. But what's even more fashionable is that trip down to Planned Parenthood, where they'll sit across from that underpaid social worker who swears her ultra-liberal upbringing prevents her from passing any sort of judgment, despite the concealed look of contempt curled in the corners of her lip as she goes through her checklist. Question 1, how long have you been sexually active? The child with child sits back and tries to recall which of the first times was the real first time. Was it that time that only comes to her late at night after she has put aside all the things that go bump in the day? Where she wonders if the images that races across her rapidly moving eyelids are a window to a place that existed way before she was to be who she was to become? With this tiny version of herself, barely out of diapers, and with legs that only recently learned to stand, were made to spread as she lay there, taking in the putrid smell of Vaseline that served as a guide to the womanhood that was millions of years away. Was that the first time? That dream of a nightmare that haunts even in its invisibility? Or was the first time when she was 14 years old with knock knees and 2 tiny bumps that sat flat against her chest, when she had finally convinced herself to put aside childish thoughts of one day reuniting with the woman who 10 years earlier gave her up to total strangers? A woman who hours and hours she'd wait for during visiting days, sitting in that room filled with broken toys, a perfect match for the broken souls that clutched and poured at them. She'd sit there in that room, screaming out to the world in silence, waiting on the emptiness, the only thing to take her in its arms. So when he came along, older and wiser, with arms hard and strong, his power not only consumed her, but stole from her the light she kept on in case the lost wanted to find its way home. Was that the first time? Was her light a beacon to come aboard and pillage whatever valuables she had left?
Tracy's thesis advisor is Roger Rosenblatt. Who presents her with Zora Neale Hurston's novels and stories. If we could have rediscovered a wonderful writer, someone who was not yet known, we would have triumphed with Zora Neale Hurston. But here, we have been able to rediscover the extraordinary talents of Tracy M. King-Sanchez, reborn and reconnected with her talents as a playwright, essayist, poet, and memoirist. Voila. Ryan Famulari. I'll let you guess. No, I'll tell you. His thesis, the sum of my parts is, oh, I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong one. His thesis, Soldier On, is a screenplay telling the story of a gay teenage quarterback struggling to come to terms with his sexuality in the conservative climate of small-town Florida.
Before I start, I just want to thank Genevieve and my brother Anthony for helping me out here. So, Genevieve will be playing Mara, and Anthony will be the main character, Kyle. Alright, here we go. Interior, Dairy Queen, day. Kyle, 2 milkshakes in hand, heads back to his table by the window. He gives Mara her milkshake before taking a seat across from her.
So, did it hurt?
I've taken worse hits. I will say, though, these kids down here are a hell of a lot faster than New York.
We chase rabbits here.
Kyle laughs and sips from the shake.
No, seriously. Well, maybe not here, Burden, exactly, but there are kids in other towns that chase rabbits.
Get out.
Don't believe me then, Mr. All-American.
Mara looks away and drinks her shake. Kyle looks at her. He searches her face as if it holds the answer to a question that has plagued him his whole life. Mara turns back and blushes.
I didn't know we were in a staring contest.
Kyle is startled and looks away.
Sorry, I was thinking.
About?
Kyle quickly searches for an excuse.
Next weekend, homecoming.
Football isn't all you think about, is it?
Before Kyle can answer the question, he's distracted. Scott, from 6th period history, enters the Dairy Queen and heads to the counter.
Sorry, no. I think about a lot of stuff. There's way more to me than just a dumb job.
I never said you were dumb.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't be the first. Who's that guy up there?
Mara looks to the counter where Kyle's focus has been. She studies the tall, thin body of Scott for a moment. She turns quickly back to Kyle, leaning over the table.
That's Scott Cousins.
Kyle looks closer at Scott, finally a name to a face.
Been out of the closet since like the 1st grade. It's a shame.
Why?
Well, I mean, no one wants to be gay.
You get bullied a lot?
What do you think?
Sucks.
I don't agree with the whole gay thing, but that doesn't mean you should give the kid a hard time. It's not like he can help it. God made him that way. Though, I wonder why he did.
Did what?
Make some people gay. Seems like a horrible thing to do, but he must have his reasons.
Scott takes his order from the girl behind the counter and heads back to his car. Kyle follows him the whole way.
So anyway, you ready for homecoming?
Kyle's eyes are on Scott's car as he pulls away.
Yeah. Just hope the team is.
Scene.
Ryan's thesis advisor is Annette Handley Chandler. She chose Farber on Film, the complete film writings of Manning Farber, one of America's great critics, who saw elements and values in film that no one else saw. and who gave us the tools to see them too, for Ryan Famulari, whose talent and humor keep his story compelling and moving. Rakia Marashi. Her thesis, Open Arms, is a novel about a young girl and her family leaving everything except their secrets behind in Afghanistan.
When Mrs. Swanson rang our bell and I went to answer, I knew she came for one of two things: to deliver her handmade cake that won the Medal of Honor by our household, or that she needed my father's help in the yard. Rarely did Mrs. Swanson drop by to say hello, or for any other reason. She appeared busy, even though she was retired, living in a 4-bedroom house alone. She had a gray cat, Muffles. Sometimes I'd see her through the window carrying in bags of groceries from the local supermarket. Unlike elderly Afghan women, Mrs. Swanson was energetic for someone her age. I'd never asked her how old she was, but her oldest child was in his early 50s, so she must have been, at least 75. My mother was only 39. When I'd ask her why she didn't put nail polish on anymore or lipstick, she'd say, "Leave me alone, your mother is old now." Mrs. Swanson's delicious baking skills were priceless, irreplaceable. She'd bake an almond-topped cake that appeared as if the caramelized almonds were plastic or oiled. It shined no matter where you were standing. That was, if you were lucky enough to have a slice. It was just one of her many talents. Every time I'd see her outside, she would be tending to her flowers that she'd planted along the side of her driveway. Or she'd trim the bushes, cut a few stray branches. She started baking her almond-glazed cakes for us a few months after we'd moved in. She'd wrap a piece of cardboard neatly trimmed into a circle with aluminum foil and place the cake in the middle. Then she'd cover it with another piece of foil. Her white Dutch colonial house had a distinct scent, cinnamon potpourri mixed with cat litter and library books. I smelled comfort. Her house was just as old as ours, built in the early 1900s and barely renovated. Her foyer and the stairs that led up to the top floor was a Victorian shade of blue. She invited me inside and walked into the kitchen, shuffled papers around on her retro dinette set. Its weight and uneven chrome legs caused it to shift from side to side. She dropped a pen on her linoleum yellow floral floor. Its edges had turned up, losing adhesive over the years. Zany stood beside me, her hands in her jeans pockets. Mrs. Swanson shuffled through a deck of index cards and rummaged through the uneven pile of papers on the table, looking for a clean sheet to jot down her cake recipe for my mother. "Now, watch carefully when I show you how to get the topping golden." She hurriedly jotted down a few more words. "I'll mix the ingredients for the topping and show you how it's done." She dropped the pen on the table and walked over to the oven. Does your mother have an electric or gas stove?" She turned the knob to broil. "Gas? Well, she won't be able to do this last step in the oven then. She'll have to use the broiler, but it's much hotter." She moved the metal rack one ridge higher, wearing a yellow pot glove, a rusted orange at its tip. "It'll probably burn down there in the broiler." She spread the mixture of almonds, butter, sugar, and a few other powdered ingredients. I figured my mother would never master the caramelized almond topping since we didn't have an electric oven. I stopped listening and just nodded. "Then you spread this over the cake like so." Her hands shook as she used the spreader to coat the barely browned cake. I stood beside her, not retaining any of the information she told me. "Uh-huh," I said. She placed the cake in the oven on the metal rack, below the orange coil of heat. The oven door was wide open and she stood to the right and turned the cake slowly. "You want to make sure to rotate it, like a wheel, so it browns evenly," she said. "Okay," I nodded. I'd always imagined the almond glaze coating was far more complex. Every time it had a slice, I thought about what fancy gadgets Mrs. Swanson might have used. A blowtorch, an industrial contraption that made a dull cake shine as if it had been coated in syrup. But that day, Mrs. Swanson showed me some things are not as difficult as they may seem. Thank you.
advisor is also Luann Walker, who chose Eudora Welty's stories, essays, and memoir for Rakia's wonderful comprehension that everyday life is dependent upon what the everyday actually is. Rakia Marashi understands Welty's reliance upon a ticking clock, two people sitting in chairs, two children wondering what their futures will be, unlike any other young novelist. Ashleigh Marie Smith. Her thesis is an untitled, we'll work on that, collection of poetry that explores various characters through the passage of their lives, how language grows with them, and how it shapes them.
60 poems, and the hardest part has been the title. I'm going to read two poems. The first one is from a center section of my thesis in which characters speak at several points throughout their lives. This first one is called Hernando. 1993, business trip at 8. There used to be pigs here, fields of pigs, mama pigs and papa pigs and baby pigs, all covered in little white hair. Pig families, all together. Once, Papa told me stories about when he was a little boy on the farm with Abuelo. Everybody worked on the farm. They grew maize and tomatoes and pigs. Now Papa says there are cheaper pigs, and that's why the pigs went away. The pigs went away, so the people went away. There's no more pigs, and that's why there's no more people. Papa left too this morning, so it's just me and Mama and Jose Carlos and Isabella. Papa went where they all went, El Norte. Papa says he will come home. Mama says he will come home when he's raised enough money. This second poem I wrote over the summer during the writers' conference while I was in the basking glow of big famous names. It's called To the Poet. I write poems, but I am not a poet because you are a poet. And if I'm a poet and you're a poet, then we're both poets. And that puts our poetry in the same arena and our poems in the same category. And I don't think my poems are quite up to the challenge. So let's call it a draw and have a rematch between my poems and your poetry for some other day and some other year down the line, and we'll finally know who the real poet is and who simply writes poems. Because there's a difference between the person who writes a poem or two and the person whose life is the poem. So let's keep writing, and I'll write my poems and you'll write your poetry, and maybe one day I'll be a poet like you're a poet, and I'll write poems by living.
Ashleigh's thesis advisor is me. And I chose Robert Frost's collected prose, poems, and plays in recognition of Ashleigh's mastery of dramatic monologue, her understated voice, and her meticulous observation of the natural world. Miranda. His thesis fictions and short stories, half of which are magical realism and half a magic all their own.
This is a story about an acid trip. It's called Donut Holes Are People Too. And this is the last little, like, 5 bits of it. The kid's, like, totally in the middle of tripping right now. Sarah McLachlan's on the cover of Rolling Stone. Pollen yellow flower petals pepper her red, red lips. Flower child with a filthy mind, the headline reads. In smaller text over her left temple, gold greed in Indonesia, the future of capitalism. The photographer who made Sarah's mouth a floral money shot is not filthy. The greedy capitalists ready to rape Indonesia are not filthy. So why Sarah? Look at how pretty she looks, how prettily perfect. Eddie taps me on the shoulder. Come eat a donut hole. His voice sounds stuffed with cotton. You can't eat a hole. Come eat a donut hole, he says, his voice now clear and miles away. Not till Sarah says something. Sarah says, come eat a donut hole. I look back at the cover. Sarah's skin is now in flames, her eyebrows waving back and forth like switchgrass in a hellstorm. Her sun-thick, mud-brown eyes collapse into twin starless nights. She starts to say something. I stumble out into the hall. Donut holes are people too. I think I've taken 5 or 6 chews, halfway through chew 1. I chomp and chew, stretching my jaw to cartoonish Cheshire cat lengths, but I can't swallow. My tongue is intimately aware of every golden atom of fluff-stuffed innard. Donut holes are no less a miracle than you, or me, or they. To eat a fellow miracle is to sin platonic, I think, and then I hear bones crunch and spit it out, and nearly vomit in disgust at my crime. God gets pissed. We're walking around the parking lot, me and Eddie, not God, and Eddie asks if I believe in him, God, not Eddie. And I rehash my trek from believer to skeptic to nihilist to relativist, and as we pass under a lamplight, I say, I deny God, and the light goes out. And we laugh. A few minutes later, I deny God again, and another light goes out, and we chuckle. But the third time it happens, we go silent, our lopes uneasy. 2 gazelles unsure, the tracks they keep passing in the night belong to the long-rumored dead king of the jungle. I can walk on water. What'd you say? Eddie says. I didn't say anything out loud. I didn't say anything out loud. What'd you say not out loud? I can walk on water. I point to Ellicott Pond. At this hour on a windless, moonless night, it's smooth as blacktop. You probably shouldn't. But you know I can. Eddie curls in a fetal ball on the sidewalk. The potato bug is back, and the 2 of them have unfinished business. I walk to the pond's edge and lay in the grass. A frog I never see coming ribbits in my left ear. Ribbit, the stars say, singing greening, clanging variations of ribbit. Every answer I never knew, I now know the question to. 100,000 million billion ribbits, gonging, drowning the sky. 3 hours later, breakfast. We try waking Keith, but he's out cold. Mr. Smith's too busy studying for a C++ exam. Rocco wants to come, tells us to hold up, but then he gets the shits. Creatine gives you monster shits, so he's out. Eddie and I start to leave when John pops out from behind the green evergreen sheet over his bed. His mom put $100 on his meal plan yesterday. He'll get our breakfast. That morning I eat the best scrambled eggs of my life. Peace.
Matthew's thesis advisor is Susan Scarf Merrill. American Fantastic Tales, Terror and the Uncanny from Poe to the Pulse. For Matthew's deep understanding of the psychology of unrest, beautifully demonstrated in both his fiction and memoir. He takes his place in a lineage that includes such masters of the fantastic and uncanny as Poe and Hawthorne, Charlotte Perkins Gilman, and Ambrose Bierce, whose works are included in this book. Combaluzier-Louis. Her thesis, Love is All We Need, is the fictional story of a girl who loses her mother at the age of 12 and her voyage of recovery and growth.
The narrator here is thinking and talking about her first cousin, Olivia. And then I remembered a book I had read called Leonardo's Dream Machines, and the writers who had inspired me, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry and Anne Morrow Lindbergh. I thought of the flying machines, objects created by man, birds by God, but also metaphors for an important aspect of our mind, of our deeper thoughts. Olivia would reveal to me the secrets harbored in her mind that inspire her to create and fly man-made machines, designed by men and women with dreams, like Leonardo, dreams of the impossible and possible, dreams of pushing investigations to the limit, dreams of reaching yonder. In Night Flight and Southern Mail, the pilot uses the isolation in the cockpit and in the sky, in the darkness of the unknown, to think deeper thoughts, to investigate the depths of his mind, to understand the reasons for existing. Anne Morrow Lindbergh interests me, and I'm glad Olivia triggered my memory of her, because she has a gift with words and is a poet. She was a pioneer woman, the first to earn a commercial pilot's license and to fly a single-engine airplane. In her book, Gift from the Sea, she strives to understand the meaning of a woman's life, as well as point out the importance of the sea in the world we live in. When Olivia told me she wanted to study aeronautical engineering, I was glad for her and proud of her, but I didn't relate to the topic. My interests at the time were animals, writing, and art. Her explanations tonight made me realize once again how everything can be interconnected. Her field of studies and her experiments demand a knowledge that I will not acquire, but nevertheless connect beautifully to poetry, art, and the environment. Like Paul, I will pay closer attention from now on to the work of engineers and designers that allow us to lift and soar into space. I'll take flying lessons too.
Martine's thesis advisor is Roger Rosenbaum. His choice of Catherine Ann Porter's collected stories and other writings reflect his sense of this writer's darkly ironic understanding of human nature and the lucidity of her prose. Nicholas LaRousse. His thesis, Napoleon, is a screenplay about a high school senior with dreams of going away to school. Forced to stay home, he discovers that the family he was trying to leave now needs him more than ever.
I also just want to thank Emily and Anthony for helping me read the scene. Interior college library night. Galena works at a table. It's late. She's alone and flustered. Paul rounds a corner and approaches the table.
They really burn you guys out, don't they?
That bad?
It's kind of late.
A librarian, an old crusty woman in her 70s, slowly wheels a squeaky cart of books. Paul takes a seat at the table, reading from her book.
Pharmacology.
Unfortunately, yes.
Doesn't look so bad.
You don't have to memorize it.
Coumadin.
I should know this.
Anticoagulant. Thins the blood, prevents blood clots.
Galena looks over to Paul. He's not reading from the book. The librarian continues crawling with her noisy cart.
How do you know that?
My grandfather takes it. See, in that book, it's just another drug, but when you know for a fact that it's keeping someone alive, I guess it kind of stands out.
Never really thought of it that way.
It's funny though, sometimes it works too well and it thins out the blood so much that it can't come at all. Like the other day, he hits his knee on a table and his leg turns this terrible looking purple. And it scares me, you know, because it's one or the other. There's no middle ground. It has to be one extreme or another, and no matter what side you're on, you have to suffer.
But isn't it worth it?
Worth it? Is that part of your bedside manner?
No, I mean, nobody wants to suffer, but if it wasn't for the moments of pain, how could we feel pleasure?
It takes Viagra for that.
The librarian stops the cart. The absence of the squeak leaves a miserable silence.
It's kind of late.
I should probably get going too. I've got stuff to do.
Scene.
Next thesis advisor is Annette Handley Chandler. She chose American Movie Critics, an anthology from the silence until now, for Nicholas LaRousse, who confidently creates a moment, allowing the silence and making it hum. Rakia Lydia Greenan. Her thesis, Border Town, is a novel in parts centering on an unusual group of people living in a fictional Connecticut town.
This is the very last page of my thesis, so spoiler alert. There are no variations in the cold that surrounds Connie, no difference between the itching iciness running through her body that makes every shortening breath razor-tipped, conch-scented, and the white chill that covers her body like a blanket. She doesn't know how long she's been out there. Hours ago, days maybe, she managed to pull herself up against a tree, could smell the sweet odor of Christmas that clung to her hair after she fell again into the trunk and prepared herself to die. She was all right with dying wrapped in a fragrance reminding her of love and warmth, except eventually it faded and was replaced by the tang of her own blood as it pumped out a pattern in the snow from the wounds crisscrossing her body. She turned her face from the sky when it started to snow again, but turned back when she realized that she did not want the last thing she saw to be her bloodied wool cap. She can't move anymore, can't feel her arms and legs, doesn't even know if they're still there. Her eyes are frozen open. All she can see are black smudges and occasional spots of light, the moon and stars in their field of midnight. She hopes. And then there's nothing. Connie thinks she'll finally die and is grateful for it. Except no. The shadow is a person, a faint heat and a stench that replaces the one of her blood, burning. The shadow glows as it comes into focus, the mutable orange, red, and yellow of fire. She tries to ask a question, but there isn't enough air. I think today is your lucky day, little one, a voice says. She's never heard this voice before, hot, painful, full of promise and deception. The shadow bends down and she can make out a face, two sharp teeth and the hint of a smile. Somewhere in the dim universe, Connie is starting to leave. Someone screams, "How badly do you want to be saved?"
Lydia's thesis advisor is Luann Walker. selected Kurt Vonnegut novels and stories because of Lydia's extraordinary understanding of the natural, the supernatural, the absurd, and yes, the super absurd, which turns out to be something that all of us understand, that all of us discover to be comprehensible. Louis.
When I was 14, Mom, Dad, and I moved from England to California for Dad's job. The transition to California had been easy. I developed a large circle of friends and a respectable social status in high school. But the night we arrived in Southern California, I thought I would never fit in. It was 11 o'clock at night, and I was wide awake and eager for the sun to come up so I could explore the place where I'd be living for the next 4 years. Dad suggested we walk the dogs over to my new high school, which was right next to the apartment complex we'd be staying in until we found a house. Misty and Chaz, our 2 chihuahuas, had been cooped up in a cage in cargo for the 11-hour flight, so we walked the dogs 2 minutes to my new school, through the parking lot, and past rows and rows of blue lockers and several classrooms. When we reached the place that I would later find out was the school gym, I heard voices and froze. Should we go back, I said, not wanting to be seen by any of my potential new friends as someone who lurks around campus after hours with her parents and 2 chihuahuas. But I was curious. What did California kids look like? What did they sound like? What did they wear? I inched closer to get a better view. To my horror, I saw girls all dressed alike in cropped denim jackets, plaid shirts tied in a knot at the navel, short denim skirts, and cowboy boots. Denim and denim, I thought. Who does that? The guys wore their shirts tucked into their jeans with big flashy belt buckles. My God, where are we, Texas? I had no idea they dressed like that in California. I had been bragging to all my friends back home that in California I wouldn't have to wear school uniforms anymore. But suddenly I longed for the monotony of my navy skirt, navy tights, pale blue button-down, and striped tie. I spent the next few days moping around the apartment, dreading the first day of school, convinced that I'd have nothing in common with these people and their acid-wash denim. But when school started the following week, the kids I met seemed relatively normal. Several wore these hideous sandals with cork soles that curved up the foot with leather straps that looked like something a 90-year-old woman would wear. And others chose to wear flip-flops over thick white sport socks, the thongs squeezed between their socked toes, which seemed to completely defeat the purpose of a flip-flop. Another guy wore a shirt and a bow tie with jeans and sneakers because he was on the basketball team and it was game day, he said. But that made no sense to me. The geeky look was not how American athletes had been portrayed on television back home. For the most part, though, the girls and guys at high school dressed just like me in jeans, t-shirts, and hoodies. I later found out that what I had witnessed that night at the school gym was a Sadie Hawkins dance, a country and western themed hoedown where the girls asked the guys to dance and each couple had to dress alike. We didn't have dances or school activities like that back home in England, but at least the fashion issue had an acceptable resolution.
Nicola's thesis advisor is Luann Walker, who selected Edith Wharton novels, given Nicola's deep comprehension of nuance, of narrative, of the navigation of a life that finds itself on a very different course. Elaine Rooney. Her thesis, Some People Have Real Problems is a novel about a 28-year-old lawyer who realizes she doesn't want to live the life she's been set up with.
Okay. I was 10 when my parents got divorced. The dinner where they announced it seemed like an ancient ceremony, perhaps for family destruction. I say this because my father came out in a robe, my mother with a face mask on. This was extremely strange because it seemed like they were either coming from a spa date or they had both happened to lose their minds at the same time. What I didn't know then was that my father's bathrobe was an act of defiance against my mother, who demanded a certain dress, certain brands, a certain lifestyle. And my mother wearing her face mask was slightly easier to decode. She had spent the day crying and thought it would look less strange to act like she had spent the day exfoliating. Allegedly, the intention was to unveil the separating of the parents at an ice cream date after dinner some point the following week. My father thought he would take us kids to Carvel, get us sundaes, and since we'd be so distracted by hot marshmallow sauce and chocolate soft serve, we would be fine with our parents ending their 25-year marriage. Unfortunately, this plan was stupid for various reasons. One being that my brother was 20 and currently much more excited by anything that altered his state of consciousness than he was by Fudgy the Whale. Another was that Karen was 18 and wouldn't want ice cream because she had an eating disorder. A third, and arguably the reason that sealed the destruction of my dad's plan, was that my mom was so furious with him she didn't care to give us sugary distractions to soften the blow. So there we sat 3 days before Christmas because that was when Karen and Tim were home from college. It started with me saying that I really liked the stuffing that had no celery in it. I don't like celery either, Anna. Unfortunately, your father is very selfish. I like celery, Karen offered. I don't really care about celery. What time will dessert be ready? I'm going to John's no later than 10, Tim said. Of course you can't stay with your family for a whole night. Oh, God forbid, a whole night with your family, my mom said, seemingly on the verge of tears. Margaret, please get a hold of yourself. Fuck you, retorts Mom. Quiet all around the table. Can someone please pass me the salt, says Dad. I really like the potatoes, I say, not knowing where the salt was on the table. My mother is staring blankly at her plate. Something is obviously wrong. My anxiety is creeping up through my arms and spreading through my body because I think I know. Finally, Tim grows sick of the tension. What the hell is going on? Your father is leaving us, Mom. Margaret, for God's sake, says Dad. What, you can't tell them on your terms? Sorry, I got to decide when to tell them. This is inappropriate, he practically whispers. You're leaving us? Karen asks, more confused than panicked. No, your mother and I are getting divorced. The only one I'm leaving is her. I'll still be here for you kids. Then after a pause. Now, will somebody please pass the fucking salt?
Walker. Willa Cather's later novels, including A Lost Lady and Death Comes for the Archbishop. Thank you. Do we have an Archbishop? For Rooney's profound sense of place and time, and for the lyrical quality of this young writer's prose. Her thesis, titled Vernacular Tattoos, is a collection of poems that interrogate sexuality, domesticity, and other sociocultural constructs amidst playful jousts with language and form.
As an introduction to this first poem, 3 years ago when I came into the program here, I was terrified of sharing my work. I had to even enter as a non-matriculated student. It was much easier on me. One year later, the Southampton Review published my first poem, and as a result of this exceptional program and the support and encouragement of my fellow students and teachers, I've been published several times now. And the poem I'm going to read today is forthcoming in the American Poetry Review. And that's just one of the more quantifiable ways that this program has impacted my life. So, outside LaGuardia's Delta terminal at dusk. The Indian man swings his yellow plastic bag as if it were a happy child. The overweight flight attendant sucks on her green-strawed, reliable frappuccino. The businessman sighs, loosens his tie, and slumps into cell phone pose. Yes, all of these things remind me of him, in that none of them are him. I'm sitting in my car at the airport, waiting and watching everyone go somewhere, home, away. They are focused, and all I can see is his shirt, that blue hatch dress shirt I wanted to wear. It's on the indigo woman chomping gum as she waits for the shuttle, on the woad couple talking loudly and not looking at each other, on the man with the limp and the coal tar cigarette too far inside his mouth to be from around here. And yes. And then I just thought I'd read a real short one that I recently wrote. It's sort of my version of The Lonely Planet or Farmer's Guide, and I said, what to do in Belize, Guatemala, and Mexico. Remove all familiars from your day, your week, your month. Stand back from your apartment, your dogs, your cat, your father, your divorce, your debts, your degrees, your drugs, your espresso. Who are you then? Take the clothes on your back and some water and lose everything else. The queen of the vultures, the duchess of the pelicans, the princess of El Mundo Perdido de Decal, the baroness of the barracuda, a howler monkey gorging on tiny figs perhaps, or the crystal maiden of Aktun Tunachil Muknal, struck from behind and left to calcify in her teenage bones. Now undress. Ask yourself, who is this naked beast?
Phoebe's advisor is me, and I chose Heart Crane complete poems because, like Crane, Phoebe has forged a sometimes dense lyric idiom for herself that nonetheless remains strictly, recognizably, timelessly American.
We know this one as Carla Cagliati.
Wow, that was amazing. I'm so proud and impressed by all of you. It's just great. I'm here to honor a couple of faculty and staff. This is an award that we give to a faculty or staff member who, helps make this possible. And last year, the winner of the Avram Family Faculty Staff Awards wasn't here. And so I want to first give a shout out to her, Adrienne Unger, because she wasn't. You didn't get to hear that applause. So this year's winners of the Avram Faculty Staff Awards, we have two. The first award recipient is someone we all know and love. I first met her in the basement of the Natural Science Building where we housed. And now she is even among the skyscrapers of Manhattan, running the very successful Manhattan branch of our program. So please congratulate Magdalene Brown. Our second award winner is both new and not new to the program. Without her, however, many of our MFA students would not have reached this stage. She has been a prolific outside reader and now thesis advisor, tireless TSR associate editor, talented writers speak curator, and her inaugural short story walk workshop will begin this fall. Please congratulate Susie Merrill.
Guess who I'm going to call up? And that Hadley Jammer!
I just want to say congratulations to you all. The work was remarkable. Really should be proud. In 2009, Roger Rosenblatt was selected as one of the 3 finalists for the Robert Cherry Award for the most distinguished university teachers in the country. William Safire of the New York Times wrote that Roger Rosenblatt's work represents some of the most profound and stylish writing in America today. The Philadelphia Inquirer cited his essays for unparalleled elegance and wit. Kirkus Reviews noted he has excelled in nearly every literary form, and UPI, United Press International, calls him a national treasure. He is a national treasure, and he's ours. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Roger Rosenblatt.
I think in all fairness, I should tell you that after UPI named me a national treasure, it went out of business. Congratulations, dear people. It's wonderful to see you gathered and know that I'll never have to look at you again. By the way, only Rakia gave me a gift. Where was I? Some of you may have seen a little piece I did in the New York Times Book Review this past Sunday, and it begins with an anecdote, a true story of my granddaughter, Jessica, who introduced me to her 4th grade class, to whom I was about to speak, introduced me thus: "This is my grandfather, Bappo," invoking my grandpaternal name. "This is my grandfather, Bappo. He lives in the basement and does nothing." Now, this, I couldn't fault her for accuracy, because that's true, but I wanted to, instead of going in the direction of that particular essay, go in the direction of doing nothing. I do nothing, and you will do nothing, and I wish you to do nothing for the rest of your wonderfully glamorous, futile lives. But a writer does something or nothing differently from other people. Billy Collins, Billy, our wonderful friend and colleague, Billy Collins says that the difficulty of being a poet is you don't know what to do with the other 23 hours of the day. And this is kind of true, but it isn't, in the sense that the other 23 hours of the day are spent writing the poems, but not with hand and pen and paper, but by looking around. And in that, he is functioning within a tradition of doing nothing. Writers take walks. You have read writers taking walks. Thoreau took a walk, and Wordsworth took a walk, and Rousseau took a walk, hating all the world that hated him. Hesse took a walk, and Bachot took long walks in The Wanderer. And this is a tradition of literature which I wish you to be able to walk and to understand the beauty of doing nothing in this tradition. And it's also talked about as a kind of receptacle. You know this new book, Imagine, and it's an interesting new book about the mind opening itself to experience and then learning from that open-minded condition. But a writer's open-mindedness is a little closed and it's a little craftier. You know what you're writing while you're doing it. And you've all experienced this, colleagues. And then you go for your walk or your kayak ride or your bike ride or your run or whatever it is you're doing. And you're kind of watching for something that fits the piece, but the mind is still open. You don't know where that will come from. And it may not fit the piece that is currently taking shape in your mind. It might create a different kind of piece. It might create a new puzzle. Richard Wilbur has a poem called Mind, which he compares to a bat, and he says the mind is a bat that flies around in a cave and hits the walls, but occasionally the mind, in a wonderful surprise of intellection, corrects the cave. And this is the kind of wandering writers do. It's the kind you do now, and the kind I wish for you, the joy of which your whole lives. Some of you have been my students, the brighter ones, and some of you here have been my students, and to whom I've constantly told you, ask yourself over and over again, whatever genre we're working in, what is this about? What is this about? I would encourage you to ask friends, partners, wives, husbands, what is this about? And so to create this mantra-like repetition, so as to ground you, to make sure that you are always within the tune of your story or of your poem or of your essay. But the interims count too. Between your asking, the times in between your asking what you're about. When you're not thinking, you're also thinking. And then the mind of the wanderer narrows. And unconsciously you are waiting for something to fit the piece of your puzzle and to enlarge the puzzle. It does come to you. I can't explain why, you can't explain why, but you know this by now. It comes to you. And yet you are the siren singing the song that attracts you. How this works, I do not know, but it happens. And then you find yourself in this wonderful state of being able to create something that seems to have created you in the first place. And this I call creative drift. Creative drift. That you move in the world not quite with your feet on the ground, but knowing that the world of beauty and meaning and terror and love will come to you. And it does. And funny things come to you too. It's also not like locked in a time, this state of creative drift. When I was a teenager, I had the irritating habit of memorizing lines from movies and then waiting to insert them into conversations of my friends. You may imagine what a delightful social companion I was. Other people would be having a perfectly reasonable conversation, and I would simply be waiting with a number of lines that I had in mind to insert them. And I was not interested in the normal run of lines. Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn, or Louis, this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. No. I took lines from movies like Earthquake, which was one of the disaster movies of the 1970s. And Earthquake was, one of the subplots was about a man who was stalking a woman throughout the entire movie. Then the earthquake hit, and then he jumped her. Now, you would think he had something else on his mind when the earthquake hit, but it shows how focused he was. He jumps the woman, and George Kennedy, who was playing a cop, as George Kennedy always played a cop, George Kennedy throws him off the woman, shoots him, and says, I don't know, earthquakes bring out the worst in some guys. I waited many months before I heard a conversation. Living in the East made it more difficult. And I never, in fact, really got a place where I could insert that line. But there is a line, which I will tell you now, which on the face of it will sound to you more difficult to insert in conversation and with which I had success. This was from one of the Nigel Bruce, Basil Rathbone, Sherlock Holmes movies. And Nigel Bruce as Watson wants to impress a couple on a train with Holmes's prowess and history as the detective, and says to them, when they indicate they have not heard of Holmes, Haven't you heard of the giant rat of Sumatra? Haven't you heard of the giant rat of Sumatra? Decades passed. And then I was working at the Washington Post. I went out to lunch with some guys, and it happened to be the 50th anniversary of Mickey Mouse. And some guy at the table said, "Has there ever been a bigger rodent?" The way I hook this nonsense back to what I'm talking about, as I waited for an opportunity to put in, "Haven't you heard of the giant rat of Sumatra?" I also waited for an opportunity in something I was writing to stick that story in. And this year, as I'm writing about detectives and memory and a number of other things that fit, wandering around, sure enough, after 20 years, that damn dopey joke comes back to me, and it fits, and I am so happy. Well, that's all I have to tell you. I mentioned we don't want to see you again except for Rakia, who gave me something. I'm supposed to close this ceremony, so I will close it this way. At Harvard graduations, the president of Harvard welcomed the graduates to the company of educated men and women. That happens every year. We do not do that with you. We know better. We welcome you instead to the company of the neurotic, the impoverished, and the tormented. But that's our company too. We're not leaving you. And I must tell you, as I know almost everyone in this group, with great pleasure, and it has been an honor for all of us here to be in your company, that we respect you and we love you with all our hearts.
And now we feast.